Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Jackson Crawford. Today I want to look at an unusual name of Loki that has never been explained particularly well that I've seen, the name Loftr. And I want to discuss my sort of speculative answer to what that name means, and my even more speculative but connected answer to what the name of the pretty obscure god Hœnir might mean. Alright, so let me start off with a seemingly unrelated point. In Old Norse, the verb to die is døya, and it's a strong verb. The past participle is døyen in the masculine nominative singular, døyet in the neuter nominative accusative singular. So to say that someone has died, you can say that han hefir døyet, although you don't see that particularly often. Usually there's a lot of other euphemisms for that kind of thing that are used in Old Norse literature. But the adjective dead is not typically døyn, døyt. You don't say han døyn. You say han døðr. And that's formed from the same root, Germanic dau. But instead of being formed like a strong verb, it's formed as if it were what I call in my Old Norse lessons an I-type weak verb. So, possibly, this verb was rolling around in Proto-Germanic as both a strong verb and a weak verb, and even though it's only the strong verb that survives in Old Norse, it is the past participle from the weak verb that produces the very common adjective dead. Why do I bring this up? To show that verbs can jump verb classes, which is what's important in considering my explanation of the name Loftur for Loki. So this name occurs twice in the poem Lokasenna. And stanza 6, Loki calls himself Loftr when he says, "I've come thirsty to this hall after a long journey." And we see it in stanza 19 when the goddess Gefjun calls him Loftr when she says, "Lopski that vet at han lekin och han fjorg ol fröl." Loftr, Loki, doesn't know that he's being played with, and all the gods love him. I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, the usual supposition about this is that it's related to the noun loft, meaning air, sky, right? This is what's borrowed into English as loft. Other old ideas are Gehring's idea that it's from the same root, but it's also sort of a past participial formation that would then mean like tall or lifted, although we would expect that to have umlaut. We would expect that name to be Lofter, not Loftr. And then there's another old idea that is kind of bizarre to me, that this is somehow a worn-down form of Loft, elder, sky, fire, meaning lightning. Loki has no known associations with lightning or with fire, in spite of Wagner and Dungeons & Dragons promoting that idea for a long time. So, and I also don't understand how you get Loftr from Loft, elder. But my idea took inspiration from Gefjun calling him this name in the same breath as she says that all the gods love him. Here's my proposal. The Old Norse verb lova means to praise. Now, that is an A-type weak verb, so the past participle praised is lovadr, lovat. But if die can jump from strong to weak, jumping from one weak verb class, an A-type, so-called in my series of Old Norse lessons, to an E-type, which would have the past participle Loftr, seems pretty plausible, especially when you consider that Old High German has the cognate verb loben as both the equivalent of an Old Norse A-type and the equivalent of an Old Norse E-type verb. So those are both bouncing around in Proto-Germanic. What's to say that the name Loftr isn't the past participle to a now underused, certainly, but probably just unused in Old Norse version of that root lov? So Loftr means praised one. Now, why would it mean that, since Loki doesn't get praised? I would suggest that this is euphemism. We see this actually in the names of gods. Shiva, my colleague Kaylee Smith, a specialist in Sanskrit, tells me, literally means the civil one, and He also reminds me that in Aeschylus' Oresteia, the Erinyes, the Furies, get renamed by Athena the Eumenides, the good-minded ones. And there's this sort of notion that we propitiate beings that might not necessarily be evil, but maybe ill-disposed toward us by giving them a slightly happier name like that. My colleague Luke Gordon reminds me too that the Greeks sometimes called the Black Sea, the sea friendly to strangers, and the night the good time. So there's all kinds of taboo deformations of names and renamings of things, gods included, to make them seem less fearsome. And I wonder if that's exactly what's going on here. If Loki's name actually there, Loftr, is praised one, it's a euphemistic name for him, and it matches perfectly then with Gevion using it in stanza 19, reminding him that everybody loves him. After all, English love and this verb lova, praise, go back ultimately to the same root. Now I'm going to give you a quick message from my sponsor and then tell you about my weirder, more speculative idea about the name of the god Hœnir. Alright, so here's that idea. The weird thing about Hœnir, this is a super obscure deity. He shows up in Snorri's story in Ynglinga Saga about the Aesir and the Vanir exchanging hostages after their conflict, which is completely different from his story in the Prose Edda, which is probably closer to older mythical traditions. And other than that, he shows up just as part of a trio with Odin and Loki. They travel as a trio when they encounter Thjazi in eagle form, in a story that Snorri relates in the Prose Edda. They travel as a trio when they encounter Otter, and Loki kills Otter, thus setting off the chain of events that ends up with the cursed treasure being paid for Otter, and then the cursed treasure becomes Fafnir's, and it becomes Sigurðr's. It's a big part of the Volsung story. In those stories, Hœnir is just a silent partner to Odin and Loki. And then in one version of the story of the three deities walking on the sand and turning driftwood into human beings. By the way, side note, the reason I sometimes say deity lately is I have to use Google Docs to type my lessons for great courses, and it drives me insane by capitalizing gods, no matter how much. I have all spell check and grammar check stuff turned off, and it still thinks I'm wrong for not capitalizing plural gods. So I've gotten in the habit of saying deities from talking to that damn thing. Okay. Anyway, Hœnir is then one of the three. Now, in the trio in Völuspá, Odin, Hœnir, Loftur, we can only kind of assume that Loftur is Loki, but it makes sense given that this is otherwise a pretty established trio, Odin, Hœnir, Loki. And Odin is called in poetic kennings and skaldic poetry Loftsvinir, Lokavinir, Lothursvinir, in a parallel way that suggests that he is sort of canonically the friend to Loki, of course suggested by the Lokasenna reference. Loki says that he and Odin pledged they wouldn't drink without each other around. So if we assume Lothr is Loki, I think that's pretty safe. Then we have Hœnir showing up, other than in Snorri's who knows where he got it story in Ynglinga Saga, always with Odin and Loki. Okay. So I got thinking about, Hœnir must have something to do with Loki if he always shows up when Loki's around, or something to do with Odin if he's always in association with these figures. So that got me thinking about the name Lofthøna. This is a woman's name, and it sure as hell looks like it means sky chicken, right? Loft, sky, Høna is hen. And then I got to thinking, well, what if it's a combination of the name Loftur for Loki and then a feminine form of Hœnir? I no longer think this. I think it is just sky chicken. But it got me thinking about their association, and it got me wondering what Hœnir means. Because the root Hön sure looks like chicken. So is Hœnir the chickener? Is he Colonel Sanders? That seems really unlikely to me, because chicken's not a, mythically or culturally important bird to the Norse. So it got me wondering if maybe Hœnir is from that root, but we're looking at it thinking about the wrong bird. Here's what I mean. Hjörð means a herd. Hörðir, with umlaut and a similar masculine suffix, means the one who herds, the herder. Could the Hœnir be the one who takes chicken? Could this be Hœnir as a name is a old poetic name for something like perhaps hawk, falcon, maybe something like a fox, or in a North American context, which this isn't, perhaps a coyote, like I hope you heard yapping in the earlier part of this video. That's my proposal. A little bit more speculative than the one about Loftur, which I actually feel pretty good about. But now you have my weird little speculative thoughts. Maybe I put them in a paper if I thought anyone would read them. This way at least someone sees it. I think Loftr is the name of Loki, perhaps means praised one, being a euphemistic name, just like Shiva is for, Shiva the civil one is for a god who brings destruction. Just like the Eumenides, the gracious one, is a euphemism for the Furies. And I wonder if Hœnir connects that god to birds of prey, which of course would be associated with Odin, who's often associated with hawks, eagles, and ravens, and Loki, who's often associated with the falcon when he borrows Frigga Freya's falcon suit to go flying into Jotunheimar. Well, those are my thoughts about that. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this Patreon-supported video, and I hope you'll consider supporting my videos on Patreon if you have. I hope you'll check out my translations, and I'll stop yapping at you. I'll just wish you from beautiful Colorado all the best.